I have worked for Gideon Hartwell, Duke of Hartwell, for 9 years, and in that time, I have never once seen him read a document twice. He is not a man who wastes motion. He moves through correspondence the way he moves through a room, efficiently, without sentiment, leaving nothing unconsidered and nothing disturbed. A 40-page parliamentary brief, 40 minutes. A barrister's opinion in 3 volumes, an afternoon. Every ledger, every deed, every solicitor's letter that crosses his desk is processed, annotated in his spare black hand, and returned with a dispatch that would have made a campaign general weep with envy. In 9 years, I have learned to lay documents on the left side of the blotter and retrieve them from the right, and I have never once found a page still sitting there in the morning. The night of the 15th of October, I found 31 of them. I had placed the report on his desk at 7 in the evening, an unassuming thing, bound in brown cord, with a plain cover sheet that read only Renwick Boundary Dispute, a summary and resolution, prepared by P. Alcott, estate archivist. I set it on the left side of the blotter, with no particular ceremony. The Renwick dispute had been a dull wound in the Hartwell estate for 11 years. 3 solicitors and 1 King's Counsel had each tried and each retreated, billing enormous sums for the privilege of confusion. I had not expected the archivist to do better. I had not, in truth, thought of the archivist at all. I knew she existed. I knew her name was in the staff ledger. I knew the records room had been reorganized in her first month, and had never once needed to trouble me since. That was the sum of my knowledge of P. Alcott. At midnight, I knocked on the study door to bring the Duke his customary glass of water. He did not answer. That was unusual. I opened the door a crack, prepared for some small emergency, and found him at his desk, with the report open before him, his coat still on, a second candle burning, that he must have lit himself at some point, and the look on his face of a man who has been shown, very quietly, that he has been wrong about something for a very long time. I set the water on the corner of the desk and withdrew. At 2 in the morning, I heard him rise and light another candle. At 4, I heard the scratch of his pen. At 6, I came down to find him in the same chair, his cravat loosened, the report open to its final page, and 3 sheets of his own notepaper covered in his close black script beside it. He looked up when I entered. He looked, in all honesty, like a man who had been struck somewhere soft and was not yet certain how to account for the sensation. "Finch," he said, "who is the archivist?" I told him her name in full. Phoebe Alcott. Daughter of a Warwickshire printer, trained in estate management by her father's employer, before that household dissolved, employed at Hartwell House for 3 years, at the recommendation of the previous housekeeper, who had since retired to Shropshire. The Duke was quiet for a moment. 3 years, he said. "Yes, Your Grace." Another silence. Then, "Where does she work?" "The archive corridor," I said, "behind the east staircase. She keeps the hours of 8 to 4, and occasionally later, in the cases requiring the record room lamp." He said nothing further. He rose, folded his notepaper into his coat, and went upstairs to dress. I looked at the 31 pages still open on his desk, and felt, for the first time in 9 years of service, that something had shifted in Hartwell House. Quietly, without announcement, like a door opening that had always appeared to be a wall. He went to the archive corridor that morning at 8:30. I know this, because I followed him, at a discreet distance, with a pretense of business that convinced no one, least of all myself. She was at the long sorting table when he arrived, working through a bundle of correspondence from the previous century, with the focused patience of someone who has learned that nobody is coming to help. She did not hear him in the doorway. The table was deep in the corridor, and the lamplight was directed at the papers. And so for a moment he simply stood, and I watched him watching her, and I thought that I had never seen the Duke of Hartwell at a loss for an opening before. He solved it, eventually, in his own fashion. He said, "The boundary markers you reference in Section 3, you verified them personally." She turned. Her expression, to her very considerable credit, did not alter at the sight of the Duke in her doorway, which was more than I could have managed. She set down the paper in her hand and said, "I did, Your Grace, twice, once in September and once in November, when the autumn flooding let me see the original marker stones beneath the silt." "The case turns on those markers," he said. "Yes, she said. I know. There was a pause. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, not the assessing glance he gave to solicitors, not the impatient attention he gave to peers, something else, something I could not immediately name. Section 9, he said. The argument from the 1789 deed. I had not seen it made that way before. No, she said. I suspect the previous council were not reading the 1789 deed alongside the parish register. The discrepancy is only visible if you hold them together. She paused. It took me some time to find the parish register. It was misfiled in the household accounts for 1791. I have since corrected the index. The Duke was silent for a moment. Then he said, You corrected the household index as well. It seemed sensible, she said, with a composure so complete and so natural that it could only have been built from years of being underestimated. The filing had not been updated since your father's time. He came back the next morning and asked her about the drainage records. He came back the morning after that and did not ask about the records at all. They spoke for an hour about the enclosed pasture at the north end of the estate, and then about the architectural drawings of the original house, and then, I am not entirely certain how they arrived here, about whether the decision to move the kitchen garden in 1743 had been wise given the aspect. She had an opinion. It was an informed one. He disagreed. She told him why his disagreement was incorrect, with a clarity and a brevity that I had previously associated only with his own dispatches, and he listened to her with his arms folded and his chin tipped down in the manner he reserved for arguments worth following to the end. After a moment of genuine silence, not the dismissive kind, not the impatient kind, but the kind that comes after something has genuinely landed, he said, You may be right. I had worked for Gideon Hartwell for 9 years. I had never heard him say those 3 words. He told me nothing. He did not explain these visits or acknowledge them or adjust his manner in any way that I could use as evidence. He remained, to every outward measure, the same man he had always been, precise, controlled, brief, the kind of silence that fills a room rather than emptying it. He answered correspondence in under an hour. He left documents reliably on the right side of the blotter. But he went to the archive corridor every morning. And I noticed, as weeks became a month, that he came back from those mornings slightly less like a man at siege. Something in the set of his jaw eased. His annotations grew a fraction less spare. Not verbose. Never that. But there were moments now where the black script turned a corner and said almost something, lingered a beat past the necessary. I caught him, once, reading a page he had already annotated, not correcting it, simply reading it again, which was a thing I had never seen him do in 9 years with any document on earth. I thought of a river in January, still cold, still fast, but a degree less like ice. It was on the 1st of November, a Tuesday, raw and gray, that I happened to be crossing the Rose Courtyard at the back of the house on my way to the wine cellars. The Rose Courtyard is not on any direct route to the wine cellars. I will not press the point. He was standing at the stone bench near the far wall. She was there too, though she was not sitting. She stood at a slight angle, her hands clasped, her dark coat plain against the dead garden, looking up at him with an expression I had not seen her wear before. It was not wariness. It was something steadier than that, and more careful. The look of a woman who has been waiting for a particular sentence and is now deciding, word by word as it arrives, whether she trusts it. I was too far to hear every word. I heard enough. I heard him say, I am not a man who asks easily. He stopped. He tried again. I find that I have become accustomed to mornings. She said something. He listened to it with the full, absolute attention he usually reserved for intelligence reports. Then he said, I am not speaking of the records. The silence that followed was not his kind. It was not the silence of a man who has decided to say nothing. It was the silence of a man who has said the necessary thing and is now, for the first time in a very long while, waiting to see what the world does with it. She said, and I heard this clearly, because the courtyard carries sound, I know you are not, Your Grace. Another pause. Gideon, he said, very quietly. She was still for a moment. Then, Gideon. I had somewhere important to be. I found it immediately, and went there at once. What I can tell you is what I observed in the weeks that followed, that the brown cord reports from the archive corridor, continued to arrive with their usual impeccable order, and that they were now annotated in two hands, his spare black script, and a second, darker, sharper one that corrected him, occasionally, in the margins. That the Duke of Hartwell, who had not attended a dinner party since the campaigns, accepted an invitation in December and was seen to sit beside a woman in a plain gray gown for the entirety of the evening and to speak to no one else. That in January, on a morning of hard frost, I passed the rose courtyard and found two sets of footprints in the thin white on the stone, one pair of boots and one pair of smaller shoes, and they had walked there together and stood at the bench a long time. They were married in February, quietly, in the village church, with myself and the housekeeper and Phoebe's father as the witnesses. The Duke of Hartwell, who had not asked anyone for anything in a very long time, had apparently asked Phoebe Alcott the question in the archive corridor, without ceremony, surrounded by the files of the previous century, because, as I later learned she told her father, it was the only place either of them had ever been entirely honest. The land dispute was resolved by Michaelmas. The boundary markers held. The 31 pages were bound and placed in the estate records, where they remain. I asked him once, not long after the wedding, on an evening when the house was quiet and he was in a mood that passed, in the Duke of Hartwell, for contentment, what it was, exactly, that he had read in that report, in the small hours of that October morning, that had not let him sleep. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Clarity, and the refusal to pretend a problem is smaller than it is." He looked at the fire. I had not read anyone who thought the way she thinks. I found I wanted to know how she arrived at every sentence. He paused. "I still do," he said. Outside, in the cold dark of the rose courtyard, a lamp was burning in the archive window. She worked late on Tuesdays. She had told him she would not change the habit, he had said, with less than his usual economy of feeling, that he had not asked her to. He had only moved his evening reading to the chair beside the window that faced the courtyard, so that the lamp in the study and the lamp in the archive were a pair of lights in the dark, each in its own quiet keeping of the other's company. That is the shape of them. Not grand, not declared, not assembled for a room to witness. Just two people who think with precision and warmth, and who find, in that cold world of ballrooms and dispatch boxes and land disputes, 11 years unresolved, that they are the only room each other ever needed, and that this, it turns out, is more than enough.